She died in the fire. The woman across the street whispered, her voice cracking, as she passed a mug of coffee to a firefighter. I stood 20 feet away, still hidden behind Helen's overgrown hedge. My coat smelled of engine oil and smoke. I hadn't planned to be outside in the cold with ash in my hair and soot streaking my cheeks. But then again, I hadn't planned on surviving the fire my son set for me either. They thought I was in bed. That's what he told the police. She usually falls asleep around 9, Jason had said, sounding shaken. She never made it out, but I had. Not by running or screaming. I'd already been sleeping in the garage for weeks. No one asked why a 74-year-old woman with a bad hip chose a cot in the corner of a drafty garage over her own bed. Jason never noticed. He hadn't come back to that part of the house since November, when he said mold made it unsafe. The night before the fire, he brought me a bowl of soup and a cheap bottle of wine. He called it our little tradition, like we'd been doing this for years, but he never looked me in the eye. He wiped the counter too much, smiled too fast, and when he stood at the front door, he hesitated before saying, "Sleep tight, Mom." Then came the soft click of the deadbolt from the outside. He thought I was trapped. But I waited until the porch light blinked out, then slipped out the side door of the garage, locked it from the inside, and sat down with a blanket and a thermos of tea. I placed the camera on the shelf above the toolbox, angled just right. And when the flames came, I pressed record. The garage wasn't warm. It smelled faintly of oil and old wood, and the cot creaked every time I rolled over. But it was mine. The house grew quieter in strange ways. Jason stopped knocking. He started using my car without asking. He bought groceries and put them in cabinets I no longer opened. Then came the mail. It was an envelope marked with the name of an insurance company I didn't recognize. I opened it thinking it was junk. But it was addressed to Jason, full name no, and Marin, no cosigner. It was about homeowners insurance, a new policy. The coverage amount made my chest tighten. Nearly $500,000. More than the house was worth. No mention of me. I stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it neatly and placed it back in its envelope. That afternoon, I caught the bus to the electronics store 2 towns over. I paid cash for the smallest security camera they had. It fit in my coat pocket, came with a wall mount, and barely made a sound when turned on. I told myself it was for peace of mind, but as I stood in the cold garage that night, setting the angle just right toward the kitchen door, I realized I already knew what I'd find. And I didn't have long to wait. Jason showed up just after 6, a takeout bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "Thought we'd have a little Friday dinner," he said, grinning too wide. His voice was bright chipper, like he was auditioning for the role of a caring son. I played along. I set 2 plates down on the counter while he unpacked the food. Frozen pot pie, already microwaved. The wine was the kind you grab from a gas station shelf. He poured it sloppily, then moved around the kitchen as if checking for things that weren't broken. "You ever fix that porch light?" he asked casually, flicking the switch twice. "Windows close, okay?" "Lock's good." I gave him a nod. No words. I knew better now. We ate in silence mostly. He filled the quiet with weather updates and vague stories about work. At one point, he laughed at something he said and looked up to see if I was laughing too. I wasn't. At 8:15, he pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket. "Nothing big," he said, sliding it across the table. "Just some standard liability stuff. You know, housekeeping." I didn't touch it. I took a breath, then slid it under the old red cookbook next to the stove. His jaw clenched for just a second. He left at 8:30 after wiping the counter clean, like he didn't plan to return. I didn't go to bed. At 2:43 a.m., I woke to the soft metallic click of the back gate. I sat up slowly. The green light on the camera blinked in the darkness. 2 shadows moved across the yard. One tall one, wider. I didn't recognize the second man, but I heard Jason's voice low and certain. Then the scent hit me, sharp chemical, unmistakable. Gasoline. They moved quickly, pouring it through the back window along the baseboards across the steps. One of them carried something wrapped in cloth. The man with the tattoos lit the rag. Jason watched. And I watched them both. The flame caught fast. I watched it leap from the rag to the porch rail, climbing the wood like it remembered every step I'd taken across it. It spread in bursts, sharp, angry, hungry, turning 30 years of paint into smoke in seconds. Jason didn't flinch. Neither did the man beside him. They just watched it for a beat, then disappeared down the alley like they hadn't just erased a lifetime. The windows flared gold. I heard the pop of glass giving way, the low groan of heat settling into the beams. I stayed still beneath the quilt, crouched behind Helen's hedge, the cold from the ground creeping up my legs. My fingers clenched the edge of the fabric, the camera heavy in my pocket. The little green light had blinked until the smoke reached it. Then it shut off. 10 minutes passed before I heard sirens. The fire trucks came roaring down the street, tires screaming. Too late. Too late to save what was already gone. The responders moved fast with quiet precision. Hoses dragged, ladders thrown, orders called out. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The fire had already taken the core. The roof gave in with a sharp crack, folding into itself like wet paper. Somewhere, a neighbor called my name. She was still inside, someone said. She couldn't have made it out. I stayed quiet. I didn't cry. Not for the walls, the photographs, the letters tucked into the drawer of my old desk. Not for the chipped kitchen tiles Harold laid by hand. Not even for the boy I once rocked to sleep in the corner of that same living room before he had a name for betrayal. I only felt the ache in my knees, sharp and constant. Proof that I hadn't turned to smoke too. The smoke curled around the oak tree, wrapped itself around the memories we planted beneath it. And in that haze of heat and loss, I waited until the last hose hissed into silence, until the investigator's car pulled in, dark and slow. And then I stepped into view. The investigator arrived just before 9, his car rolling to a stop at the curb like it had done this 100 times before. He stepped out slowly, adjusting his jacket as he surveyed what was left of my home. The roof had collapsed inward. The front steps were nothing but char, and the siding curled away from the frame like burned paper. He didn't call out. He didn't ask for survivors. He simply began working. Clipboard, camera, quiet steps. I watched him trace the perimeter, boots cracking over the frozen grass. He paused at the back porch, crouched and touched a piece of scorched flooring with the back of his glove. He knew it was deliberate. Even from where I stood behind the hedge hidden, I could see the shift in his posture. Professional, but troubled. When he turned toward the street to return to his car, I finally stepped out. "Excuse me," I said. He straightened, startled for a second. His eyes flicked over me, smoke-stained coat hair, matted with cold ash, the exhaustion I hadn't let myself feel yet. But he didn't speak. "You'll want to see this," I said, holding out the camera. He hesitated before taking it. The device looked small in his gloved hand. He pressed play. 10 seconds and his eyebrows pulled together. 30 seconds, and he exhaled sharply. When he reached the moment Jason lit the rag, his jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "would you sit?" There was a porch swing on the neighbor's side we used in the summers. I sat there now, the quilt wrapped around my shoulders, the wood creaking beneath me. He stood a few feet away, still watching the footage, the flames reflecting across his face. My hands rested in my lap, steady. I didn't feel brave. I just felt done. Done waiting. Done shrinking. Done pretending not to understand what Jason had been turning into. The investigator stopped the video and looked at me with a seriousness that told me everything had changed. And when he asked if I could walk with him to the car to give a full statement, I rose without hesitation, ready to follow him into the long morning ahead. The station smelled like old coffee and floor wax, the kind of place where nothing soft lasted long. They walked me past rows of desks into a side room with a heavy door and thick glass. Mason, his name I'd learned, set the camera on the table and plugged it into their monitor. "This is just so we can confirm the timeline," he said gently. I nodded. I didn't need confirmation. I knew what I saw, what I lived through. He dimmed the lights, and there it was again. My home still standing, Jason's shape in the dark, the rustle of his coat, the second man's voice low and impatient. And then Jason's clearer than I'd remembered, like it had been waiting to echo in that room. "She sleeps like a rock. Let's make it quick." I didn't cry. Not even then. Mason watched me as much as the screen. I could feel it, but I didn't meet his eyes. I kept mine on the fire blooming again on that monitor. The way my son moved through the kitchen, casual, almost bored, like flipping on a light switch. Like it wasn't where he'd taken his first steps, where he'd learned to write his name with jelly sticky fingers on the counter. When the video ended, Mason shut it off. The room felt smaller. "We've already called the district attorney's office," he said. "They've seen enough. It's attempted arson insurance fraud and attempted homicide." I nodded again. I'd come here to speak, not to argue. "You understand what that means?" "My son tried to kill me," I said. "I understand." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Would you be willing to testify?" I looked at him at the reflection of the blackened house still faint on the screen behind him. My voice was quiet, but steady. "I plan to." Mason exhaled. "Then we'll move quickly. You'll be safe." I didn't answer. I didn't feel unsafe. I felt like something inside me had already burned down. And now, finally, I was standing where the ground had cleared. I sat back in the chair, ready for what came next. He showed up just after lunch. Helen answered the door, then turned to me with a look that said she already didn't like what she'd heard. The man standing on her porch wore a suit that didn't fit the neighborhood gray pinstripes shoes, too polished for our cracked pavement. His briefcase looked untouched, the kind they only carry into rooms where they assume everyone else will fold. "Mrs. Delaney?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Stephen Clean. I represent your son, Jason. I didn't invite him in." Helen stood close enough to make that clear. "I'd like a moment if that's all right. There may be an opportunity to resolve this." Quietly. He said it like a gift. "Your son is understandably distressed," he continued. "This situation has escalated, but there's a path forward that doesn't involve courtrooms." I waited. "We believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully, like he'd rehearsed it. That was the word that did it. "No," I said. He locked me in. He lit the match. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a plan." He flinched slightly, but didn't argue. Just looked down and straightened a paper in his folder that didn't need straightening. "Jason is your only child," he said softer now. "This will destroy him." I stepped out onto the porch closer. He already destroyed something I said. He just didn't finish the job. His mouth opened, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned back to Helen. "We're done here." Clean stood there a beat longer, then nodded and left without another word. His car purred as it pulled away too sleek for a street lined with screen doors and porch swings. Helen didn't ask what he said. She just handed me a mug of tea, her hand warm on mine. Later that night, when I sat alone in the guest room, I whispered it to the dark for the first time. My son tried to kill me. It didn't sound like betrayal anymore. It just sounded like the truth. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in the way sound echoed, like it had nowhere soft to land. I took the bus that morning, woke before the sun folded my coat over my arm, and walked up those courthouse steps alone. My knees protested with each stare, but I climbed them steady. Jason was already there when I entered. He sat at the defense table, hands cuffed in front of him, his suit hanging looser than I remembered. His eyes didn't meet mine. They didn't look at anyone, really. Just a blank stare fixed somewhere between the floor and nothing at all. They called my name. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. The clerk asked if I was ready. I nodded. The prosecutor spoke first. Calm, methodical. He asked when I'd moved to the garage. Why? What I'd seen. What I'd heard. I answered plainly. I didn't elaborate. The facts were enough. Then they played the footage. The room dimmed. The screen flickered. Jason's voice filled the silence. She sleeps like a rock. Let's make it quick. I didn't look at him. I didn't look away. I kept my hands folded in my lap and watched the porch catch fire again, this time in full resolution. A jury of 12 watched too. I heard someone inhale sharply when the match dropped. When the screen went dark, the lights came up slow. The defense attorney rose. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, careful. "Do you believe your son intended to kill you?" I looked at Jason for the first time since the fire. His face had changed, or maybe mine had. Either way, he looked smaller. Not younger, just less. "Yes," I said, "I do." There was no sound in the room, only the slow scratch of the clerk recording every word. When I stepped down from the stand, I caught the eyes of a woman on the jury. She didn't look away. She didn't look sorry. She looked like she understood. And that, I thought, was enough to keep walking. I parked the trailer on the edge of the foundation, just where the front steps used to be. It wasn't much: tin walls, one stove burner, and a bed that sighed every time I sat on it, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, every inch of space around me belonged to no one else. Each morning, I swept the yard. The ash still drifted down when the wind picked up. It caught in the corners of the old fence along the sidewalk cracks, even in my hair. One afternoon, I bent to clear a patch of charred leaves and felt something round beneath my boot. It was the back doorknob. Still whole. Still faintly warm from the sun. I turned it over in my palm thumb, fitting into the worn groove the way it always had. I didn't cry. I just carried it inside, washed the soot from its edges, and placed it on the windowsill. A small, strange kind of anchor. Helen came by in the rain with a bag of groceries tucked against her chest. She didn't knock, just stepped in, dripping and kind. She made tea while I sorted the canned goods. We sat across from each other at the little fold-out table, steam rising between us. "Do you miss him?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. "I miss the boy," I said eventually. "The one who used to collect bottle caps and hum to himself when he thought no one was listening." She nodded. "I don't know the man who walked into that courtroom." We sipped our tea in silence. Outside, the storm tapped on the tin roof like it had somewhere else to be. I watched the knob on the sill caught in the low light. It didn't shine, but it didn't belong to the fire either. It had stayed, just like I had. That evening, I planted lavender along the back edge of the lot in the soil where the kitchen once stood. The first rain soaked through the earth. And in the mailbox, I found the letter. The lavender took to the soil better than I expected. Its roots dug deep, stubborn against the ash. I planted it slow, a row at a time, right where the porch used to be. The scent wasn't strong yet, but it was coming. Some things take time. The letter arrived the next morning. Plain envelope, government stamp. My name written in a hand that was steady, familiar. It was from Mason. Inside just one page. "My father died in a house fire when I was 11, he wrote. It was ruled accidental. But it wasn't. No charges were ever brought. No one believed me. I became an investigator to prove people wrong, but I never did. I read those lines twice. Then came the last part. Thank you for not staying quiet. You reminded me why I started." I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer with the others. Court papers. Old receipts, the note I'd written to Jason and never sent. Then I poured myself tea, same as I did every morning. Only this time I took it outside. The sky had cleared. The tree by the trailer still leaned, half of it scorched black, but the other half bloomed. I sat beneath it, the sunlight flickering through what was left of the branches. The cup warmed my hands. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. No trophies for surviving your own son. No prizes for telling the truth. But I felt whole. Not untouched. Not unscarred. Just whole. And that was enough. The tree creaked in the wind, leaves brushing against each other like voices too quiet to hear. The house was gone. The locks. The wallpaper. The kitchen. Jason took his first steps in. But not my name. I still had that. And as I sat there, cup in hand, eyes closed beneath a sky that had finally turned quiet, I realized some things don't survive fire. But some things never needed to. And some part of me, the part that had waited so long to speak, had finally remembered how.